Let me ask, right? Is there anybody you wouldn't accept to come to your church?
Mainly black people. Just kidding.
This pastor, Joel Webbin, Christian nationalist, self-proclaimed, he's a MAGA, quote unquote, pastor. That's what you really want to call them. But he is someone that recently went on a podcast and he said that he believes certain people should not be in his church. So watch this very quick clip of him talking, and I want to come back and share my thoughts on it.
The market is filled with a lot of different voices.
Yep.
Let me ask, right? Is there anybody you wouldn't accept to come to your church?
Mainly black people. Just kidding. So back to the interracial marriage.
Yeah.
The irony is that because we live in the world as it is, right? So that's how you can tell a serious person versus somebody who's just pretending. Real politics is the realm of the possible, not just the ideal. What can I do given the lay of the land today, right? The circumstances that actually exist, dealing in the world of reality. So I live in, outside of Austin, Texas. It's incredibly diverse, incredibly diverse. The gospel is for all people. Now, I think that a lot of people who are within a vicinity of my church, that politically speaking, so there's categories, right? Two kingdoms, right? The kingdom of grace and the common kingdom, right? Church, which is word and sacrament, those things higher, those things which are eternal, our highest good, our eternal good, and then the temporal world. And we have to, as Christians, think not in ways that contradict, but in ways that are still distinct, depending what category we're operating in. So in the political category, there's a lot of people in my area who should not be there. They shouldn't be in our country. That said, though, I don't have much control over that.
So the first thing I want to point out is the very first thing he said, because he was like, PBD asked him, are there any kinds of people who are not invited or should not come to your church? And he said, mainly black, LOL. So even PBD, the podcast host, was kind of caught off guard by it. Didn't know if he was joking or if he was serious. You ever see those people who sit there and joke all the time? And they sit there and like sneak this by sitting here and masking it as a joke, but they're dead serious. I feel that's exactly what happened there, that he sat there and tried to make it like a joke, like mainly black people are not invited. However, he was dead serious. I don't think in a perfect utopic church setting for him, there'll be no black people. It'll be just a white homogenous type of congregation. So Joel Webbin has done podcast rounds. He's very well known on the conservative side. And one of his main teachings is that he is against interracial dating. He feels interracial dating is against norms. Interracial dating is against Christianity. And he, as a self-proclaiming Christian, he unapologetically sits there and believes that people should marry their quote unquote own kind or their own race. So white, black, Hispanic. And there's people, there's people that support him, that follow him, who are in interracial relationships or are products of interracial marriages, and they agree with him. And it's crazy that the church has been hijacked by this MAGA movement of people who say the things of God, that go to church every Sunday, that know Bible verses, but their lives are don't reflect that. I was reading earlier today in my devotional, and it was focused on love. It was focused on the fact that as Christians, evidence that God is in us is love. And I think people think the evidence of God living in us is how well we preach, how well we teach, how eloquent we are, how speaking in tongues or being anointed. But the evidence that we are really Christians is how we treat people. Miss me with your speaking in tongues and your wholehearted Christianity if you don't talk to your neighbor, if you don't treat your family right, if you don't treat your spouse right, like I don't care what verses you preach, how does your spouse view you? How do your kids view you? How does your family, like your siblings, your auntie, your uncle, how do they view you? So miss me with this Christianity where you're just so super into God and you love God, but you're a nasty person. And I think this MAGA version of Christianity, aka the conservative movement, has made this more mainstream, where people could say such to me to say, listen, I don't want a certain kind of people in my church. It's such a hateful thing to say. That is anti-Christ. That's not what Christ teaches, right? For me to sit here and say, I think people should marry their own is anti-Christ, is anti-teaching. But however, in many circles, it's norm, right? Again, he's a Christian nationalist. He thinks that the U.S. should be a theocracy, that we should model, as a country, we should model biblical views. And in one sense, as a Christian, I understand what he's saying. We would love for everyone to be a Christian and do the same thing, and it will cause a peaceful, utopic society. But the U.S. is not a theocracy. Secondly, God has given us free will. So it's one thing to say, listen, I wish the world, as a Christian, as a pastor, to say, I wish the whole world could serve Jesus. But as a political leader, as a president, as a senator, as a rep, you have to govern for all. You have to sit there and be the leader to a Christian and to a Muslim and to an atheist and to a Buddhist and to a Satanist. You are the leader of all. So I think that stance is tricky, where we try to impose Christianity onto people. I don't believe that God ever intended for the government to sit here and impose Christian values on people. I believe that God expects the church to do it. It is the church's job to invade the earth. The purpose of the gospel. See, one of the things the devil has tricked us about, and thinking that the gospel is just about us being saved. It's just about us having great church and to stop sinning. But the power of the gospel is for the church to invade the world. Right? Go, right? You don't say go to church, go into the world and make disciples. Right? So as the church, it is our responsibility to make sure we invade the earth with God. The principles of the gospel, the principles of Jesus Christ should invade our marketplace, should invade the media, should invade the workplace, should invade the hospitals. We need the church to be that. But unfortunately, we're living in a time where the church expects a leader, a presidential leader, to do the job of the church. It's not the president's job to impose and to reflect Christianity into the world. It's the church's job. And if we were, as the church, living out the gospel and doing what we're supposed to do, then it wouldn't be a burden onto our political leaders to sit here and impose Christian values. It's much easier for us to say, hey, President so-and-so, do what a Christian wants you to do. No, it's the church's job. Maybe the problem with the church is no longer the salt of the world. We assimilate ourselves into the world. We are similar to the world and not the salt of the world. So I think it's very tricky when we sit here and we say that in this type of thought, for it to be a popular, I won't say popular, but a mainstream thought that this is okay. So he began the conversation with what he tried to pass as a joke, but he was dead serious. I believe he was dead serious that he don't really want black people in his church. And he goes on in the conversation, and when answering the question, he says, ideally, that in his city of Austin, Texas, I believe he lives, that there are people in his neighborhood that should not be in his church. Why? Because they don't share his worldview. They don't share his political view. They don't act like him. They don't think like him. So he believed that churches should be homogenous. that everyone should have the same mindset and the same background and experiences. See, God calls the church to not be the same, but to operate in one accord, not look the same, but have the same spirit and same purpose. So it's possible for you to have different experiences, but still be in one accord. And that should be the desire of the church. We should not sit there and have the church become an echo chamber where everybody thinks the same, looks the same. That's not the purpose of the church. Martin Luther King said, the church is the least diverse on Sunday mornings, meaning that people tend to go to churches or to attend churches where everyone looks like them, where there's a black church and there's a white church, there's a Hispanic church, there's an African church. And I think to certain aspects, that's very difficult. It's very concerning that churches are just so homogenous. And I think it's okay to have church as a part of your culture. Because like in the Haitian culture, for example, the church plays a major part. The church plays a major part in the Haitian culture. The church is, to the songs, and that they're ingrained. Even folks that don't go to church know a bunch of we call it chant d'espérance, which is our songbook. So it's a big part of our culture. Does it mean that we should have a Haitian church? I think it's important to advance our culture. Like, for example, my kids don't hear Creole at home. My hope is that when they go to church, through the songs, through the preachings and teachings, they could learn the language. It could reinforce what we as parents are teaching them. So make a long story short, to kind of respond to what he's saying, I understand what he's saying. I understand in what he's trying to say that we should have shared beliefs, shared culture within our churches, but we shouldn't look the same. It's possible to be diverse where you have black people and white people and green people in your church, but yet still are unified in purpose and thought. And other subcultures, that's a little bit trickier. We're in Hispanic churches where they speak Spanish, and people who have come into the country need to be able to understand what's being taught. So therefore you have churches that speak Spanish. For the subcultures, that's different. It could be German, it could be Cambodian, it could be whatever, where you have Jamaican churches where a lot of what's taught is based on culture, very anecdotes and things that we learn are cultural things. We could use as Haitians, we could use certain things that only Haitians will understand, right? We could say things like "L'église l'école la caille." To someone that is not Haitian, they don't understand that antidote, but we as Haitians, we know what that means, right? So a lot of it is going to be shared culture, right? Especially in the subcultures. But for him to go on an extreme by saying, hey, everyone in my church should look like me and think like me, that's an echo chamber. That's not fair, because maybe you have someone in your neighborhood who's an American, right, who speaks English, that needs a church. And they should feel comfortable in that particular church. If you're preaching the gospel for all, because you said the gospel is for all, it's universal, which is correct, John 3:16. But his church is not for all. And I think that is perplexing, especially when it boils down to race. He didn't want to say it directly. He didn't want to be too controversial, but as he went on and talked about backgrounds and differences and perspectives, he's talking about race, especially when one of his foundational teachings is against interracial marriage. So if you feel people shouldn't get married, to someone outside their race, I could only imagine what you feel about being in church. Because if you have multiple races in your church, there's a good possibility that as Christians, one of the, places to meet and to commingle and to find your future spouse is in church. So he is going to discourage Black people, Hispanics, and Asians to be in his church. So I do not agree with the idea that church should be homogenous, that if you're, it should be a whites only church, right? Even a black only church. I think it's harder when there's different cultures involved, because certain like small like subcultures within the country, like Haitian and again Cambodian and Jamaican and so on and so forth, because a lot of what's taught includes culture, right? So I could understand why someone would create a Haitian church, right? Or a Jamaican church or so on and so forth. But to hear a whites only church where everyone is white or everyone is black, I think that in itself is tricky, because the overarching culture of this country is going to be American. So if an American, right, if we do it, let's say we keep it on cultural lines, we're going to create an American church. So by default, an American church should be open to all, right? Because we have a shared culture. I think churches are often broken down along cultural lines, but not racial lines. Race and culture are two different things. And I think what he's doing is trying to find a way to justify his Christian nationalists. I don't want to call him a racist, but race-based criteria for a church. And I think that's wrong. And that's dangerous. That a black person is not going to feel welcome in a white church, and a white person should feel welcome in a black church. I love, these churches who are now non-denominational and multicultural. That's dope too. And within the culture, you can, if it's big enough, you can create a Spanish club or a Haitian club, or, depending on what it looks like. You see churches have Creole nights or Latino nights. And I think these things where we embrace our diversity. I think one of the greatest thing we could do as a church and as a society is embrace our diversity. And if we're not going to sit here and do that and say you should not be, I'm not going to say you can't be there, but I don't think this is a church for you. Why? Because you're black. That is a racist approach, and it's not Christ-like. So we got to be careful, man. Be careful of those wolf in sheep's clothing that sits here and say God, but does not model the things of God. Because again, I'm going to bring it full circle, that the way people know that you are truly a child of God is how well you love, how well you love others, how well you accept others, how well you're being there for others. If someone has a need, say I'm going through something, and this is the only church in my neighborhood. Why can't I go to this all-white church to find God? Why can I find community? Because when you say it should be only a certain kind of people, you're trying to exclude them from your community. That, hey, I really just want to associate with people that look like me. And that's a little racist, if you ask me. So let's love the way Christ calls us to love, man. But tell me what you think in the comments. How do you feel? Is this racist? Is it not racist? Do you agree or don't you agree? I would love to meet you in the comment, but either way, like, subscribe. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. God bless y'all. Peace.